John Paul Lederach, two eminent peacemakers. John Paul Lederach, intentionally so. He goes out to make peace. It's part of his job. He's an academic, but he also goes out and works in areas of conflict. Fethullah Gulen, who is quite different. For him, peacemaking is part of the core of what it is to be human and what it is to relate. He doesn't go out intentionally as a peacemaker, but peace is the product of his exhortations. Fethullah Gulen, on the one hand, is very planned, well organized. John Paul Lederach, on the other hand, is very much a guy who is risky. He takes risks. He goes everywhere. He goes on the journey, and he finds out about the ways in which we can build bridges by serendipity. Serendipity is a great thing. It was coined by Horace Walpole in 1754, and he said, "I've just come across this new word that I've coined, serendipity, based upon the old story of the three princes of Serendip, who would wander on their travels and would discover things they hardly realized they were going to discover by virtue of good fortune and sagacity, their wisdom. They were able to make the connections as they went." And that's really Lederach's approach. So in this paper, I've been trying to show how they differ slightly, but actually how they complement each other, because they're both focusing on that building of the bridges. They're focusing on what Lederach calls the development of the moral imagination, creativity, consciousness of your social and physical environment, consciousness of the network, or as Lederach refers to this, the web of humanity, of which we are a part. And in this, now I've got an extra 5 minutes, I can say that I'll do three things. The first thing is I'll briefly say more about those differences. The second thing is I'll focus in on one aspect of peace building in practice from the Hizmet movement, and in particular journalism and the media, and how this has been worked through in Zaman Daily and the practices there. And thirdly, I'll raise a question, which is one that's been on the back of my mind throughout the conference so far, which is something about the leadership of Gulen. What kind of leader is he? What are the marks of a leader who is a peacemaker? And I'll raise that question via a particular case, which is to do with the Gaza flotilla and the interesting discussions that emerged after the shall I call it a crisis? Okay. How are we doing for time? Are we? Yeah.
I'll give you a signal.
Oh, good. Excellent. Yeah. 2 minutes to go. Give me a minute. I suggested in the paper that actually Gulen is not an optimist. The word optimism is often used of Gulen, but I'm sure he's not an optimist. Optimism is a generalized notion that things will be okay. Yeah, that's okay. It'll work out okay. No, Gulen is a man of hope, and hope is a much more precise notion. It's a precise notion that the positive psychologists have worked on, as well as the theologians and philosophers. Snyder particularly argues that hope is made up of three things. It's made up of agency, knowing what you're doing. I understand who I am, I understand what I'm doing. Agency, freedom in that sense. Secondly, goals. But these are significant goals, not just any old goal. I was looking at the posters in the Washington Marathon registration yesterday, and they were exhorting that everybody had to have courage and honor and determination and commitment. But the goal is to get to the end of 26 miles, which is okay, but it's not the ultimate moral goal that we're talking about. And we need to have a significant goal to give us a sense of hope. And finally, pathways, says Snyder. We need to see that there are ways forward. And the important thing about pathways is that pathways can only be developed through dialogue. As we dialogue, we see all the different possibilities. As we dialogue, we move into all kinds of relationships of responsibility where we become accountable to each other and to our society. We've heard a lot so far about the plural identity that is there in Gulen's thinking. And with that plural identity comes plural responsibilities that we have to keep working at to form pathways through. And clearly, Gulen, within his activities, as we've heard many times up to this point, provides each of those aspects of hope. He focuses on agency, on knowing what you're doing, on thinking, on critical thinking. He focuses on, as I say, clear moral goals and clear moral virtues. And the pathways, of course, we can see the ways forward, the ways in which people work together, the businessmen work together to fund the schools themselves, focusing on those clear moral goals. So very planned, very worked out, very worked through. I'd want to add to Snyder's and others' work that actually the other point about hope is that it's not just future referent, it's also present referent. It's about the sense of whether I am hopeful or hopeless. I can well recall as a 12-year-old child as the blackboard eraser swung by my left ear silently, and my mathematics teacher said, "Robinson, you are hopeless." You are hopeless. Yeah, it's something about who you are. You have no hope. So the other element of hope, I think, in all this peace building, it comes right back to the notions of tolerance, toleration. We could have a long discussion, you and I, about toleration and compassion and what they're about. But it's that recognition of humanity in the other. Switch to Lederach, and Lederach just slightly different, because Lederach talks about disciplined pessimism. Disciplined pessimism? How far can you get with disciplined pessimism? Well, he's talking about systematic questioning. He's talking about being realistic. It's there in different ways in Gulen too. But he's also talking about checking every aspect of our armoury, as it were. Not just the practice, but also the values and the principles. Have we really thought about our principles? Have we really thought about how they are worked through? How's the time going? 10 more? Yeah. I've got to cut to the case of the media, Zaman Daily. And they have worked through some critical principles, which you might say give hope to journalists. And of course, here we are in the great centre of journalism here today. It's wonderful, and wonderful to see all the dialogue which they create. The key thing about the Zaman Daily is that they have, like all good corporations, and there are good corporations. Like all good corporations, they have brought together their own code of ethics, but they also have a clear 5 principles, which Kerim Belgi, when I met him in Istanbul, very kindly shared with me. 5 clear principles. Good news is also good news. 2, no sensationalism. 3, no denigration and no defamation. 4, text intensivity. Pardon? Text, we'll come back to that. And 5, being in equal closeness to all the political parties. We can't go through those in detail now, but the point about all of these is that they do begin to enable responsible dialogue. And they make dialogue something you have to work at, because they use very precise terms. They even use, as Kerim said, high Turkish. You've got to work at this. You've got to work at your vocabulary. You've got to work at listening to each other and knowing what you mean. It's hard work to dialogue. It's not just about the affective side, it's about the intellectual side, as we've heard. Therefore, those principles in practice, in terms of Zaman, are quite extraordinary. They have been exemplified in the way that Zaman ensures that all different perspectives are worked through in the paper. Dialogue is exemplified in the paper. They make sure that they have people who are not of their persuasion who are writing articles. So we can hear different perspectives. And of course, for Lederach, that's key. It's only in difference that we learn. It's only when we begin to feel a little uncomfortable that we realize that there's something problematic about our own values and our own perception of our values and perhaps our own perception of ourselves. So what I'm going to put a little flag in there. Dialogue is not just about being nice. It is about being prepared to be uncomfortable. And good dialogue, I suggest to you, will make us feel uncomfortable. Without that, there will be no learning. Dissonance. How long? 3 minutes to go. Good. So, the final issue. How much dialogue goes on within? This is partially a challenge, and it may seem rather naughty, but please do get back to me and say it's naughty if it is naughty. When the flotilla tried to break the blockade, the Israeli blockade, there was a disastrous consequence. People lost their lives, and in the end, the blockade wasn't broken. But many people, many Turks, many Muslims were behind this flotilla. This was showing shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinians. It was clear, was it not, that this is one of the basic principles that they were fulfilling. And then along comes Gulen and says, no, this is not what we're about, and suggests a different way. And argues very cogently that there were other ways to do this and that the consequences had not been worked through. All of this suggests that maybe dialogue is not just about finding the same universal values and saying, that's nice, we all like those ideas, because he shared universal values with all the Muslims who were there shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinians. The real dialogue is about how we translate those values into practice, into action, the Hizmet. And that has to be and will be uncomfortable. I can recall Kerim saying the morning that he went in to Zaman Daily and they'd heard that Gulen had stood out against that, there was shock throughout the organisation. And that is, well, I want to say that's great, because at that point, everybody began to talk. And Kerim talked with Fethullah Gulen and others, and maybe we've got to agree to differ. But without that issue of difference and without that working through those details, I want to argue that peace building is not going to succeed. How are we doing for time? 1 minute? Gosh. Oh, yeah, okay. The heart of that, then, I think we can see that Gulen, very well planned, very well worked through. Lederach, much more risky, much more open to change and difference and the potential for conflict. It would be nice to see the two of those in greater dialogue. How can those be handled? And how, ultimately, does the movement itself handle conflict? And are there good examples within the movement of how the conflict, when you share the same principles, is actually handled? That'll do. Thank you.